real quickly, CATA has developed or started a petition, and the links are on the website in these funds. Susan will talk a little better, but ultimately what it's looking at is called the R&R Emergency Fund, and it's looking at the great work that Canada has done, I think, in the COVID on the SR&ED claims now that they've cleared a lot of the backlog. But the question is, what's going to happen for the next year now with COVID and whatnot? And maybe we can get some kind of process for desk review or more, basically keep things rolling on the SR&ED and not get a huge backlog. So I'll let Susan talk about that more. She can log in on that, and then at this point we'll move on to the next section, which is myself. Okay, so leading right on into the statistics then. What we do each year is we look at a bunch of statistics from Canada Revenue Agency on the SR&ED. They're published in something called the CRA Red Book. And one of the things that we looked this year is that the claims seem relatively stable, that there's around 20,000 claims a year, and the ITCs granted this year versus last year were slightly less, 4% less, but not much, and we'll talk about that a little later, that there was actually an increase in the claims for refundable and a decrease in non-refundables, but that overall the total number of claims are stabilized, and I'd say that's a good thing. So I often, or generally, I try to send my slides to the CRA in Ottawa before I present them to see if they have any feedback or comments. And their comment on this slide was that even though it looks on the other slide as if the 2020 claims went down, there was actually, the intake did not include the last 2 weeks of March because of the COVID issues, and that in actuality, when those are included, the current year was an increase over last year. Okay. The other comment that they have that I'm going to talk about, it's kind of interesting, is they don't talk about ITCs by hours, and I'll explain what that means as we look at a few of our other slides here. Okay, so just to take a perspective of, let's look back a decade at the SR&ED ITCs and what's happened. And looking at it fundamentally, there was a peak around 2007, and a decline in the total ITCs to 2010, and then a ramp up again to 2014. We pretty much hit a peak in 2014 of 25,000 claims and around almost $3.4 billion a year federally being allocated. So there was a steady growth up from 2010 to 2014, and then from 2014 to 2018, we saw some pretty drastic changes, a 27% drop. And you know, we've been talking about that and a lot of the issues that fell out of that over the past few years in our practitioners' meetings. But the good news is that this trend seems to have settled, and that those sharp declines, now whether they were a correction of bad claims or whether they were you know, done judiciously or not, can be another topic. But one of the things that we'll look at is how are the claims being adjusted. And in the details to the Red Book report, they have a series of tables about the total number of claims processed by region. And one of the things that we can see is that an average of 15.4, roughly 15% claims across Canada are set for review, on-site review generally, as opposed to being approved as filed. The interesting thing there is that percentage goes as high as 20% in the prairies, or as low as 12.5% in Ontario Centre. So there is some variation amongst that. What's even more interesting is that the adjustment rates go as high as 40%. So in Atlantic Canada, if they do a coordinated review, the adjustment's 40% of the total credits, versus in Pacific Canada, it's as low as 13%. Okay, and on average in Canada, it's a 23%. So if you're going to have a coordinated review, on average, you can expect almost a quarter of your claim to be removed or denied on average. But there's huge variations, I would say, provincially. This is getting over to a calculation here that I did, where I said, well, we also have the total hours that the reviewer spent in each province. And if I go back to the other slide on the total ITCs that were granted or allowed versus the total hours spent by reviewers, I've come up with a calculation called ITCs per hour. And CRA mentioned that they don't look at that metric or calculation, and that's fine. But nonetheless, I do find it interesting, and I'd say I have questions on why the national average would be, roughly 7,500, but Pacific Canada seems to get more bang for the buck, the reviewers there, and in Atlantic Canada, it's a third. So there, perhaps this is just coincidence, or if you believe in numbers like I do, I'd say there's probably some underlying tale to explain this, and that perhaps the policies are being applied differently across Canada, or maybe just researchers in Atlantic Canada aren't as strong as in Pacific Canada. I don't think that's the case. So again, even though CRA doesn't look at these numbers, they're of particular concern to me. Okay, looking at some of the other stats. One of the things that they look at is called the pre-claim review and pre-claim consultation process. And there really are not many being done over the year, so we're talking roughly 200 a year being done. And I think that's an opportunity that's not being used as much of it as it could. So this is a process, and we'll talk a little bit about it as well in some of the success stories and new programs that they're coming up with. But one that I'm thinking has potential and maybe just needs a better strategy to pull it out. One of the other things that we see here is something called checkoffs. Checkoffs are basically largely in Atlantic Canada where where some of your payments for the various boards that you pay to go to research, and you automatically get the credits. So they tell you what or get the expenses qualified, and you can apply for the credit. So they'll tell you, your checkoffs are $20,000, and you can file a claim for eligible expenses of $20,000. This is just interesting to me to say, when we look at the total number of claims, we say, 19,000 or 20,000 claimants, maybe a quarter of those could be just pure checkoffs, which means they're not actually doing the whole claims themselves. So it puts in perspective how many total claimants we really have and how those industries break down. Okay. One of the other things that's new to the CRA website, it was just released in March 2012, is called SR&ED Success Stories. So I took at this, and I won't spend much time on it, but effectively what the success stories are is a series of companies that talk about different experiences they've had with different CRA programs. So whether it's a pre-claim process review where they come in and talk to you, whether it's a first-time claimant service, or whether it's something specific where they come in and ask you questions. And then there's additional testimonials in here. So they talk about different industries, how they may have free seminars that an industry association can do. I've taken an example here of the ROCAN description. So if you click on any of these and get the details. But effectively what they are I would call it more of a testimonial that they tell you in one sentence or so how something worked effectively. In the SR&ED, or one of the programs was used effectively. So I think these are interesting to say the least. I'm not sure that they're that, other than that, they're more that they're currently that useful to claimants, that they're more of a testimonial than something where I can say, why can't we perhaps take an idea like this and add examples of eligible projects or something else of that nature that may again be useful to claimants. So go forward from that point. Okay. Something just happened to my meeting layout here. Okay, here we go again. Okay, at this point, I'll pause and hand it over to Julie, who's going to talk about the effects of COVID-19 and some of the related programs that have just popped up.
I don't see any chat again, so that's not an option for me. I don't see an option to put in questions or receive questions. I don't know. Do I have control over the screen right now?
Yes, Julie. If you look at the bottom left corner, there's arrows that go up and down. You're on page 56 of 170.
Okay.